Well, happy Father's Day. Cool. Yeah, you're excited. I just want to give a shout out to all the dads and for all of those who play the role of dad in the lives of their family. And so let's give a cheer for the dads. Come on. Yeah, I love Father's Day, not only because I am a dad, but because I just get to, my kids, they still think I'm cool because they're little. So it's Father's Day, they're like, Dad, you're the best ever. I'm like, this is awesome. And Father's Day is great. I was going to wear cargo shorts and a fanny pack today, but I decided not to. But I have to tell you guys one story about my dad before we get started. So when we were growing up, we spent our summers up in Muskoka a lot of the time. We camped out at people's trailers. We stayed in their trailers. We rented cabins. We did a whole bunch of different things. And one summer, we were renting a trailer, I think it was, and there wasn't proper showers in the trailer. So we went to the main shower facility to have a shower. So my dad takes me and my brother into the showers, and we get in there, and there's one of them is already being used. There's someone in one of the stalls, so they're individual showers. So we go into the next one, and we usually brought one bottle of shampoo, so we're there throwing it over the top, like, catch the shampoo, okay? And we're just being obnoxious and loud and having a fun time. And so I heard someone else come into the showers and then run out, and I was like, that's weird. Like, they didn't like our games. Anyway, so I finish up having my shower, and I get all dried off, get dressed. I walk out of the change rooms, and I just sit down on a rock, and I turn around, and I see the women's shower sign. And I run back in. I'm like, Dad, Ryan, you guys are in the women's showers. And they come running, and my dad grabs a towel, grabs my brother in a towel, runs around into the men's showers to finish up. I just felt so bad for that poor lady who was in the shower the whole time, silent, surrounded by men. Imagine how awkward that is. And hello, is anyone in there? Right? Why aren't they responding? And so it's so awkward. And you know what? I think what I want to talk about today is I feel like sometimes as Christians, we make people feel like that lady in the shower. We put them in incredibly awkward situations. And maybe you're here today and you wouldn't call yourself a Christian. You're not really into this whole Jesus thing. And you're kind of like, yeah, I feel awkward right now because someone brought me to church and I've never been to church before. And if that's you, I just want to say, that's cool. You can feel awkward. You're welcome to feel awkward, but you're welcome here too. And so, maybe you've had someone come to your door and try to tell you something about your life or about Jesus, and it's made you feel a little bit awkward. And I've been there too. Or you've been walking downtown and someone comes up to you and says something to you, and you're like, that's weird. In the fall of this year, we hosted a citywide youth event. And I ran down the street to my friend's church who had their youth group meeting because we forgot to invite them. I ran to their church. I'm like, you guys got to come. You got to come. And as I'm waiting for them, a guy comes up to me walking down the street, and he just comes up to me and goes, excuse me, do you want to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ? And I'm like, well, that's awkward. I'm a pastor, and that felt weird. And so I kind of said to him, like, well, I'm preaching it tonight. Because I was speaking like in an hour. And he looks at me. I'm like, what? He's like, I'm the only preacher in Guelph. And he starts going on and on about how he's the only person who can preach. And I'm like, all right, goodbye. And it was just weird. I'm a preacher, and I felt weird when someone asked me about preaching. And so if you're here and you've experienced that weirdness from Christians, I just want to apologize on behalf of those who are part of the church that we are sorry for making you feel weird and awkward. Because maybe if you are a Christian, you felt that tension. Right? Am I supposed to be weird? Or how do I not be weird? Because isn't like the message of Jesus so countercultural? Shouldn't I try to be countercultural? Shouldn't I just dress differently to stand out and make my friends feel awkward so they ask me questions? Or am I supposed to try and fit in as much as possible and so that they don't feel alienated and odd? Have you guys felt that tension? I sure have. I feel that almost daily at times, right? Because people say, what is your job? And I'm like, I'm a pastor. Sorry for swearing. That's what they always say. And so it's a weird tension. When me and my wife were first dating or engaged sometime around then, we joined an evangelism training course. For those of you who don't know, evangelism is the fancy word we use for sharing the message of Jesus. And so we signed up for this course, and we went week after week to study these videos of watching people time after time just going up to random strangers on the street, telling them about their sin, and then convincing them to follow Jesus. I'm like, man, it's that easy? So they sent us out on what they call the fishing trip. And if you don't know, when Jesus first called his disciples, some of them were fishermen. And he said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. Instead of catching fish, you're going to catch people. And aka they'll follow Jesus. So we went on this fishing trip, right? It wasn't what I expected. We did go down by the lake, but there was no fishing rods. And anyway, so we went out, and we're given these, I will never forget this, we're given these little tracts that says, the $1 million question. It's $1 million bill, and it says $1 million question, will you go to heaven when you die? And so you can probably tell where that heads to. And so we're running around downtown, and we're passing out these, trying to pass out these to try and convince people that they may not go to heaven when they die. And so person after person rejecting us. No one even took a fake $1 million. I'm like, you want $1 million? Like, no. And I remember I found the perfect opportunity came. I walked up to a bank, and a guy just came out of the bank, and I'm like, well, this is awesome because he likes money. He was at the bank, and I got $1 million. So I go up to him like, excuse me, sir, you dropped $1 million. And he turns around at me and says, no, I didn't. And he was just so disgusted by me. And it was at that point when I realized, why am I trying to trick people into following Jesus? Shouldn't the message of Jesus be so compelling that they just want to follow him? Like, shouldn't I believe that? It's so compelling to me that why am I trying to work hard to convince and trick people into following Jesus? I was convicted about that. And so today I want to take us on a bit of a journey. And I want to end, at the end of my message, I want to end with this phrase, this passage, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. And maybe you're sitting here and you think, the people who I've heard preach the good news, they don't usually have beautiful feet, let alone beautiful mouths. I'm not really happy to be around them. And so I hope we can move in that way. But maybe you're here today and you saw that this message is called What's My Purpose? And so I want to talk a bit about purpose first, and then we'll get into that. So I think that one of the biggest questions we all ask in life is this: what is my purpose? What is my purpose? And a lot of us would define this subjectively, as in, I'm a father, I'm a pastor, I'm a husband, maybe you are a teacher or a doctor or whatever your job is. So we would define ourselves by certain things in our life. But I'm not talking about the subjective purposes, I'm talking about an objective, an overall purpose, something that we would all share. I believe that an easy way, almost a synonym to this question and an answer, what's my purpose? The answer is mission. Mission. We have a mission, right? When you're asking, what is my purpose? What is my goal in life? What is my mission? What am I to be doing with my life? And so to start with that, I want to talk to you about God's mission. I believe that God's mission, in Latin, is Missio Dei. It just makes you sound smart to pretend you know Latin. So Missio Dei, God's mission can be explained as to send love. God's mission is to send love. God's mission is to send love. And this is most illustrated through Jesus, who we believe God sent in the flesh himself to us. So God's mission is to send love. We believe that we are made in God's image. Not that we look like him, but that we are in his likeness. So if God's mission is to send love, it should follow that our mission is to send love. We get to take part in God's mission. God doesn't just have a mission and make us as little followers that only do what he says, but he allows us to be a part and play a key role in his mission. So how do we do this? Well, I want to show you a passage you might know. It's called the Great Commandment. And it says this. Jesus was asked, what are the best commandments? Because there was just hundreds of commandments in the Jewish culture. And Jesus says, this is a summary of them all. He says this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Right? It summarizes the 10 commandments and the other ones. But then he goes on and says this: and a second is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So this whole summary of the law and all the things that had been taught was summarized in the word love. Right? That's a weird connection, law and love. But Jesus bridges that and he says, we need to lead with love and live with love, not just for God, but through God for our neighbors. And then we have the Great Commandment, and now we have the Great Commission. And after Jesus rose from the grave, before he ascended into heaven, he spoke to his closest followers, and he said these words. He said, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. That's in Matthew 28. So the Great Commandment, there's a few words in here I want to explain. The first one is disciple. Disciple just means someone who is following, someone who is being trained. But the one key word I want to explain is the word go. The word go. It's interesting. Jesus says, all authority has been given to me. He doesn't say, so I'm going to go. He says, all authority has been given to me, so you go. Go has this meaning of moving. And so a lot of us, it talks about teaching them to obey all that's commanded. A lot of us go to that part. And we just need to tell people who don't believe in Jesus what they're doing wrong. And we need them to just start getting it right. No, you can't come to church with me yet because you're not good enough yet. And we try to convince them on the obedience path instead of the first. He says, go and make disciples. Just go have people follow you as you follow me. And we often, though, separate the mission from love. Right? We separate the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. We think that our mission is to share about Jesus, but we forget that he's called us to do it in love. We separate those two. And a lot of times, though, we also make the excuse that this Great Commission, Jesus and the Great Commandment, he spoke to some people around there and to the disciples, so it's not for us. This is just for the disciples and those who work in a church, and I don't have a role to play in this. But I believe that it is all of our mission. It is not just for those of us who work in a church, but it is for all of us who would call ourselves followers of Jesus. Francis Chan, I love Francis Chan, he says this quote, "We expect our church leaders to create some sort of disciple maker campaign where we sign up, commit to participating for a few months, and then get to cross the Great Commission off our list. But making disciples is far more than a program. It is the mission of our lives. It defines us. A disciple is a disciple maker." A lot of us have replaced the church, the institutional church, with our own mission. We feel like we're off the hook because we've given those people who are employed by the church, or maybe some people who aren't us, the role of making disciples. I think that I was talking to Mark and I was saying, we're in an amazing season at Lakeside, but I think we run in danger of this, because we've been so blessed with such an amazing teaching pastor. And we've probably all said these words to friends of ours. You got to come hear our new pastor. And that is amazing. We should keep saying that. We should encourage people to come to this place. But we can't let come and see be the only way. We can't just invite people to come and see Mark, because there's some people who may never come to church. I mean, back in the days, the church, the institutional building was what was the highlight of going to church. They would build these massive cathedrals, and apparently if the building's taller, you can get a little bit closer to God, I don't know. And so they build these huge, beautiful structures, and then it became about the organization. And a lot of people here, maybe you feel like you have a past and you don't like organized religion. And I hear that, and that's not what it's supposed to be. And even in youth ministry, I've been guilty of this. It's all like, how many friends can you invite to youth? And I've had actually friends in youth ministry say, if you invite a friend, you get an iTunes gift card. It's almost we're rewarding your behavior with iTunes cards. We're bribing you to help our numbers increase. And it's frustrating, right? To me, at least, we focus so much on bringing people to church, but I want to stick with this phrase today. What if, instead of trying to bring people to Jesus, we brought Jesus to people? What if instead of only trying to fill seats, we took Jesus with us where we went? Instead of just trying to make people get right and make their way to Jesus, we took Jesus with us wherever we went and brought him to them. Then when we do invite, it's by relationship. It's not out of an obligation or a hidden agenda. It's about this relationship that we've built with someone because we've been bringing Jesus to them all along. So when we invite them to church, it's like, yeah, this is what I've been telling you about. This is the love I've been showing you. And I believe Paul illustrates this beautifully in Romans chapter 10. If you have a Bible, it'll be in Romans chapter 10, starting in verse 9. Romans was a letter written by the Apostle Paul. He wrote it to the people of Rome. It's easily titled that one. And so Paul wrote this letter before he ever went to Rome. And Romans is people love Romans because Paul is not following up on things. He's showing them what he truly believes about the message he's going to come and teach them. And so Romans chapter 10, verse 9, let's read this together. It says this, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. As Scripture says, anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So Paul illustrates this. And I want to summarize this passage by this phrase. I think this passage is the goal of our mission. And the goal of our mission is that all would call on the name of Jesus. And I believe in North America and the church, we've lost sight of this goal. We've lost sight of the goal that all people should call on Jesus. Because a lot of times we view God as this genie who's just for us and he can give us what we want, and we don't worry about other people and their faith, but we just want, God, will you please make my life better and my life easier, and will you help my problems? Oh yeah, can you help my neighbors? But still me, and we think of God as this vending machine genie who can help us. Or we see God as this sort of, this relentless cop who's always after us, and we just don't want to talk to him. We don't want to show him to our friends because we don't want them to feel judged. We just want to hang out and have a good time. And so God is viewed in negative ways. But I believe that there is more. I believe that God is actually most defined as the way that he calls us to live is by love. His love, it leads over confusion. His love over the chaos. His love over condemnation. It says that no one would be put to shame, but that we would live through him if we call on his name. If anyone calls on his name. And maybe you're here today and you think, yeah, anyone, but not me. You don't know what I did yesterday. You don't know how far I've turned from God. Anyone. It doesn't say those who've got it right. Anyone who calls on Jesus will be saved. And I need you to know that if you don't think that you're good enough for God, that's okay. He doesn't need you to be good enough. He just needs you to call on his name. Anyone who calls on him. Anyone who calls on him and declares that Jesus is alive, right? Jesus is risen from the dead, and that he is Lord, or that he is over everything in our life, that Jesus is first. It says that they will be richly blessed. And Mark talked about this last week. He said that we have been blessed to be a blessing, that we aren't just looking to be fed for ourselves, but we want God to bless us so that we can go out into the world and be a blessing to those around us. And so if this is the goal, that all would call on the name of Jesus, we have quite a bit of work to do, wouldn't you agree? We have a lot of work to do. And so Paul changes directions now. In verse 14, he says this. He says, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? How can they believe in whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. So I just want to break down these passages for you. The first thing, we're going to go through two different ways. So if you're the one on the receiving end, you're going to start with the word hear. Start with the word hear. He says, how are they going to hear? The word hear, it's more than just, hearing a sound. It's more like the word listen. And actually, when the word hear is used in the Bible, in the original languages, it has this idea of hearing and doing. It's not just about hearing something, but it's about doing something. It's not like what your spouse says to you and you're like, yeah, I heard you, and you don't do it. I actually heard that marriage can be summarized as you just yelling what to each other from different rooms all day long. What? And so it's true. So hearing, it's not about just hearing, but it's about doing. So doing what? We'll talk about that in a second, but that they would believe. Believe talks about being firmly persuaded. Right? When you believe something, you believe it's true. It's in your heart. It's there. And the idea is that there's an expectant hope. When you believe, there's an expectant hope that there's something now, but there's something to come. So they hear, believe, and then call upon Jesus. That's what we just read. The goal of the mission is that everyone would call upon Jesus. People need to hear about Jesus. They need to listen to it. They need to believe it. Right? Sometimes people stop here, and that's okay. Sometimes they stop here, right? I believe in Jesus, but I'm not going to... God's real. Maybe that's where you are. God's real. I believe he's real, but that's it. And then the next step is to call on Jesus, to call on his name. And final word is saved. Saved means to deliver, to make whole, to mend, to save from what? From sin and from death. We believe that our sin has separated us from God and that it leads us to death, but through Jesus, we have the ability to be saved and have eternal life. And salvation, the word salvation, it comes from the same word as salve. When you think of a salve, like polysporin or whatever. And so the idea of taking something that is broken and mending it back together. Salvation is fixing that relationship that's been broken between us and God. All right, so this is the job of the hearer. But there's also another person in this. When you have a conversation, there's usually two people. And there's another two words that were listed in this passage. And they are sent and preach. We'll start with preach. Preach just means to proclaim. And I want to acknowledge that most of us probably have a skewed understanding of preach. When you think of a preacher, you probably think of someone standing on a platform in some weird robe telling you what's wrong with your life. I'm glad that I'm not wearing a robe. Right? But you think of someone standing there condemning, telling you what's wrong, and you usually think of a hypocrite, right? Because when someone tells you what's wrong with you, you usually think, well, what's wrong with you? And preachers, often we think of they're the ones that bring the bad news, right? I was having such a good week. Then you had to go and tell me what I did wrong. And preaching isn't supposed to be about bringing bad news, but it's supposed to be about bringing the good news. The good news. And I believe that it's not just for people who stand on a platform. The platform is only for sight, not for position. I believe that preaching is for everyone. I believe that we are all called to bring the good news. So that preaching isn't just a style of speaking, but preaching is a way of life. It's the way that we use our words, that we proclaim, that we share, that we tell the good news. So we preach that we are sent. How can they preach if they aren't sent? There's two different words in the Bible that mean sent. One of them is like, I sent you a card. And the other one is to be sent forward. And that's this one, to be sent forward, to go forward on mission. Just like Jesus was sent, like I said, like Jesus was sent, it's the same way. We are sent. And so the preacher has a responsibility to speak, and they are from God's response of being sent. And the hearer has a responsibility to believe. And so I want to just maybe relieve some of you today. You may be believing that it is your goal to convince people to believe in Jesus by your preaching. And maybe you've been in a situation where you've told someone you love or someone you know, hopefully you love them too, about Jesus, and they responded negatively. And you've thought, what did I say wrong? Next time I need to get this right. Maybe there were some things you could say differently, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want you to know that God is in control of the mission. It is God's mission that you get to be a part of. He is the one who brings people to him, not you. You get to be a part, but it's not your fault if someone doesn't respond. It's the hearer. They believe. They are responsible for their own actions through God's power, that they would hear, believe, and call and be saved. So who sends us? God sends us. Why does he send us? To be a part of his mission. Who is sent? We are all sent. To do what? Well, the last verse says, it was how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. And it's a reference to Isaiah chapter 52, where Isaiah talks about bringing peace. That there will be a day when peace will be brought, that good tidings, good news will be brought, and salvation. And it talks about there's beautiful feet. And why walking on the mountains, it references. And so why on earth does it use the word feet? Because we're talking about preaching and sharing and talking. But why does it say how beautiful are the lips of those who bring the good news? But it says feet. And I think the reason it says feet is because our faith is not meant to be stationary. Our faith is meant to be moving. Our faith is meant to be going forwards, because our voice can only take us so far, but our feet can take us to places that we never thought we would go, where we can then share the message of Jesus. Could you imagine if we just stayed in here all week and expected our neighbors to learn about God? It would be pretty difficult. It's active and mobile faith. And I believe that we are in the middle of a move of God. I believe that God is doing something amazing here at Lakeside, and I am so excited for what he is doing. As we saw last week in these baptisms, and we've been feeling God, this new growth in worship and closeness to God. I am so excited. But let's not just stay here. Let's not just stay in this room celebrating what God is doing and what he has done. Let's go out with his mission into the world and bring that joy, bring that hope, and bring that love into our neighborhoods, into our workplaces, and into our schools. God came to us. He didn't wait for us to come to him. Let's not wait for the world to come to us. Let's go to them. God is moving. He is active, and so should we be. I want to remind you of this phrase. What if instead of trying to bring people to Jesus, we brought Jesus to people? What if instead of asking God to move, we asked him to move through us? I think a lot of us spend our time waiting on God. God, when will you do this? When God is actually calling us to go. I think of Moses at the Red Sea, and they're like, oh no, what are we going to do? God, the army is chasing us. There's a sea in front of us. It's death, and it's death. And God says, why are you waiting? Just go. Just go. Just go. I got this. Don't you remember? I've had it before. I've got it now. And we are the only church that some people will ever see. Your life is the only church some people ever see. Some people will never step into a church building. But your testimony in the way you live and love and speak to them is more than enough. Mark asked me, he put on the teaching calendar, it said one-off message, you can talk on whatever you want. And I said, Mark, I can talk on anything I want? I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And he said this, I want to quote him right. He said, I want you to talk about what we can learn from the youth. And that's why I chose this topic. Because I have been so amazed to see these students who many go, oh, they're just teenagers. They just break things around the church, that's all. It's true every week. But helped me with that. But many say they're just youth. But when I see these students, I see the grade 12s who are graduating right now. Some of them are going into missions. Some of them are going into to learn music so that they can work to lead in ministry. I mean, these students, some of them want to be youth pastors or other kind of ministry. And I'm so inspired to say, you guys don't just see the world as something scary, but you see it as something that you want to change. Actually, I used to say this phrase to them. I said, one day you're going to change the world. And I stopped saying that. I said, actually, you're changing the world right now. Keep changing it. Keep changing it. And I don't know if you guys know, some of you may know this, but this semester just finished, or is just finishing up, and in 3 high schools in Guelph, public high schools, we've had students from churches come together in Guelph and run the Youth Alpha program at lunch in their schools for their friends. They've been sharing the message of Jesus at school. Yeah, you can clap, cheer for them. It's amazing what God is doing through our students. I mean, we had a grade 7 drummer. This is awesome. God is doing something, and I'm excited for what God is doing in them. They are changing the world because they believe this. What if instead of trying to bring people to Jesus, we brought Jesus to people? So how do we do this? You can go back to that other one. Spoiler alert. Know your story. Know your story. A lot of times evangelism and sharing your faith is described as this course and this program of how you got to show people that they're a sinner, and then you got to make them cry and believe in Jesus, and then they'll be all good. I think people know what they do wrong. I think that we need to bring some hope to the world, and I think that the way we can do that is through stories. Did you know that when you're telling a story, your brain and the person who's listening brain are actually doing the same thing? It is the best way to connect with someone is through telling a story. I could tell you guys listened when I told you that awkward story about my dad. And so how do you know your story? I want to start with this question. Do you remember? Remember. Remember what God has done in your life. If you would call yourself a follower of Jesus, remember what God has done. Remember when you first met him. Remember when Jesus first came into your life. What that felt like, that joy. Maybe you were a little kid and you were like, yeah, Jesus, right? Or maybe you were older and you're like, oh, Jesus, I need you, right? Whatever that was, remember that. Remember the time when Jesus was there when you thought no one else was. Remember the time when he helped you get through that difficult season. Remember that time when you rejoiced with him after something great happened. Remember. Remember, and then I ask you, do you remember, and then do you see? Is the second question. Do you see where Jesus is working right now in your life? Maybe it's hard. Maybe your eyes are so full of tears that you can't really see that well right now. But maybe you need to keep looking because he is working. Maybe there's some great things that you think that you did. But maybe you need to know that Jesus was a part of that and he's using you. And do you remember? Do you see? And there's scary parts of our stories. I mean, all good stories have a scary part that make you stand up a little bit. And maybe you think your story is not worth sharing because you're in the middle of a scary part. But I want to tell you that the way you live in the midst of those dark times is as much a testimony as God doing something amazing. You have the power through the way you live your life in the hardest moments to tell a greater story than you've ever been able to tell. Because God isn't just a God who pursues you when things are good. He's a God who pursues you at all times. And when you share that you are clinging to that truth in the darkest moments, that is a powerful story. And so how do we do this? I think we need to reflect on our stories more often. I think we spend so much time on the now. And I'm not saying go back and live in the past. I'm saying remember the good that God has done. Remember where he's brought you to. And look and see where he is bringing you. So reflect. Write it down if you have to. Write down your story. Take some time. Write it down. If you don't know how to write out your story, come talk to me. Come talk to one of us. We will help you with that. But finally, all good stories need to be shared. All good stories need to be shared. So share your story. And an easy way to do that is to share how God's story and your story intersect. Like, I was living this way. God had this plan. Bam, they came together. And our greater story is going forward. This was shown so beautifully last week at baptisms. I was trying to baptize. I had to stop singing during baptisms because I'm going to cry and drop someone in the water. I mean, I'm like, you're baptized already. And so, but God has done amazing things in the lives of people here in our midst. And we need to keep telling their stories. And we need to keep telling our stories. And so how do we do this with others? We need to help them envision a brighter future. Envision a better story for their lives. It's so amazing when you have the opportunity to talk about your life with someone and talk about their life. Because if you're here and you don't believe in Jesus, I want to say sorry that we haven't given you a voice to share your story. We've spent too much time telling you about our lives and about how Jesus loves us, but we just don't listen. And I think we need to change that. I think we need to listen. Because I believe that our stories need to intersect. And I would challenge you today, if you wouldn't call yourself a follower of Jesus, if God isn't writing a part of your story yet, I would challenge you to say that he actually is. I want you to leave this place and to remember as well unusual things in your life, where things happen and you didn't expect them to happen. And maybe God is orchestrating that in your life for a reason. And so we're gonna sing a song and celebrate communion today, or we're gonna reflect on a song. This song is called Remembrance. And as we sing this song, I want you to remember what God has done in your life. Because when we remember what God has done and we reflect on what he is doing now, it compels us to go. And so, a few thousand years ago, Jesus had a feast with his friends. They were celebrating a meal together, and they were probably sharing some stories together. If you were hanging around someone almost all the time for 3 years, you've probably got some pretty great stories. So they're hanging around, probably sharing their time together, and Jesus takes some bread and some cup, and he talks about how that his body will be broken and his blood will be poured out and it will be sacrificed for them. And perhaps that is the greatest thing we can remember, that Jesus' body and his life was given for us so that we may live. And so I want to invite you guys just to reflect as the elements are passed out. There'll be a cup and cracker, wafer. Take one of those if you call yourself a follower of Jesus. If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to feel awkward or weird. Just let it pass by. And I would encourage you to spend some time just reflecting on what God has done, what he is doing, and to just continue to restore that relationship with him. The band's going to sing over us as we do this.